A crystal chandelier glowed above the anniversary table as Logan Hayes slid the divorce papers across the white linen, his voice steady, almost generous. Guests turned, pretending not to listen. He spoke of freedom, of outgrowing a life that had held him back. Chelsea Simmons didn't interrupt. She didn't defend herself. She only looked at him, calm, unreadable. He mistook it for silence, for weakness, for loss. What Logan didn't know was simple. An hour earlier, Chelsea had signed the final document that made her the controlling owner of the company that defined his entire future. If you believe dignity speaks louder than noise, stay with this story before we continue. Tell me where you're watching from and your local time. And if stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. The morning of their anniversary began without ceremony. In a quiet stretch of Manhattan, where glass towers reflected a pale, indifferent sky, Chelsea Simmons stepped out of a black sedan and paused for half a second before entering the building. Not hesitation, not doubt, simply alignment. She had always moved that way, never rushed, never dramatic, as if every step had already been measured somewhere deeper than instinct. Inside the lobby was polished marble and controlled silence. No one looked at her twice. That had always been the pattern. Chelsea dressed in neutral tones, soft fabrics, nothing that announced wealth or demanded attention. To most people, she was the kind of woman who existed just outside the frame of importance. She preferred it that way. Upstairs, in a secured conference room behind frosted glass, 3 people were already waiting. Evelyn Carter sat at the head of the table, her posture straight, her expression precise. She had built a reputation in mergers and acquisitions by speaking only when necessary and never missing a detail. Beside her was Daniel Brooks, and a financial advisor whose calm demeanor masked an instinct for risk that had made him indispensable to the right kind of clients. At the far end, Michael Grant flipped through a stack of documents, each tabbed, cross-referenced, and marked with exacting care. When Chelsea entered, they all stood briefly, not out of courtesy, out of recognition. "Good morning, Miss Simmons," Evelyn said. Chelsea nodded once and took her seat. She didn't ask for summaries. She didn't ask for reassurance. "Are we clear?" she asked. Daniel exchanged a glance with Evelyn, then spoke. "All regulatory approvals are in place. The holding structure through Simmons Trust has been finalized. The acquisition of Hayes and Rowe Holdings is complete, pending your signature on the final transfer confirmation." Michael slid a document across the table, turning it slightly so it aligned perfectly with Chelsea's line of sight. "This confirms controlling interest, effective immediately upon execution." Chelsea placed her hand lightly on the table, not touching the document yet. "Liabilities?" she asked. Evelyn answered without hesitation, contained within projected thresholds. "There are internal compliance concerns within one of the subsidiary divisions, but nothing that impacts the legality of the acquisition. Those can be addressed post-transition." Chelsea's eyes moved once across the first page, not reading line by line. She had already done that over the past weeks in quiet rooms and late nights when no one else was watching. This moment was not about discovery. It was about confirmation. "Proceed," she said. The pen was placed in her hand. No one spoke while she signed. The movement was steady, clean, final. For a brief second, after the ink settled into paper, the room remained still, as if acknowledging that something irreversible had just occurred, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of precision that doesn't allow for reversal. Daniel exhaled slowly. Michael closed the folder with careful alignment. Evelyn gathered the documents into a structured stack. "It's done," Evelyn said. Chelsea nodded once, no smile, no visible shift in expression. "Board notifications will be issued tomorrow morning," Evelyn continued. "Executive transitions will follow standard protocol. Your presence is not required immediately, but I'll attend," Chelsea said quietly. There was no emphasis in her voice, but it settled the matter. The meeting dissolved without celebration. No champagne, no congratulations. Just the soft, deliberate movements of professionals closing a chapter and preparing for the next. Chelsea stood, collected nothing but her phone and a slim folder, and walked out the way she had come. Invisible again. Across the city, in an office lined with glass and framed certifications, Logan Hayes was already speaking too loudly for the room. "You're going to see," he said, leaning back in his chair with a confidence that bordered on performance. "This restructuring, it's going to open everything up." People at the top, they notice who's ready. Across from him, Vanessa Cole smiled in a way that encouraged him to keep going. She had learned quickly that Logan preferred admiration to truth. "And you're ready?" she asked. Logan gave a short laugh. "I've been ready. I just needed the right timing." He didn't mention that the right timing depended on variables he didn't fully understand. He didn't mention that much of what he believed about the company's future came from conversations, overheard, half-explained projections, and assumptions built on his own ambition. What he did mention, what he enjoyed mentioning, was control. "I won't be tied down anymore," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "There are things I've been carrying that don't make sense long-term." Vanessa tilted her head. "You mean your wife Logan didn't hesitate?" "Chelsea, she's just not part of where I'm going." He said it calmly, as if describing a business decision, as if a person could be categorized and dismissed with the same logic as an underperforming asset. Vanessa leaned forward, slightly lowering her voice. And tonight, Logan smiled. Not warmly, strategically. "Tonight is just closure," he said. "Clean, public, no confusion." He liked the word public. He liked the idea that others would see him in control of the narrative. At home, Chelsea moved through the apartment with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything else. There were no signs of preparation for a celebration, no flowers, no decorations. Just a clean, ordered space where everything had its place and nothing drew unnecessary attention. On the kitchen counter, her phone lit up briefly. A message from Evelyn. Confirmation filed. Effective immediately. Chelsea read it once, then set the phone down. She opened a drawer and removed a small notebook. Inside pages were filled with dates, short notes, references, nothing emotional, nothing excessive. Just records. She flipped to a recent page. A time, a transaction amount, a location. Next to it, a simple mark. She closed the notebook and returned it to the drawer. There was no satisfaction in the gesture, no visible reaction at all, just completion. By late afternoon, the city had shifted into its evening rhythm. Logan arrived at the restaurant early as planned. He spoke with the manager, confirmed the table placement, ensured that the champagne would arrive at the right moment. He adjusted small details that to him felt like control. To others, they would look like preparation. A few invited guests had already arrived. Colleagues, acquaintances, people who existed within the same social orbit. Not close enough to question him. Not distant enough to ignore the scene. Vanessa was there too, seated at a nearby table, positioned carefully within view, but not formally included. Logan checked his watch. Chelsea would be on time. She always was. When she entered the restaurant, nothing about her announced what had happened that morning. No visible power, no shift in posture, no change in presence that would signal to anyone watching that the balance of something much larger had already moved. She walked toward the table as she always did. Calm, composed, unremarkable. Logan stood to greet her, already stepping into the version of himself he intended to present. "Happy anniversary," he said. Chelsea met his eyes briefly and took her seat. There was no hesitation in her movement, no resistance, no indication that anything anywhere was out of place, except that it already was. And only one of them understood that. There had been a time when Logan Hayes understood the value of restraint. In the early years of their marriage, before titles and projections and carefully curated impressions began to shape his identity, Logan had been attentive in ways that now felt almost distant. He listened more. He asked questions he didn't already know the answers to. He noticed when Chelsea grew quiet, not as something to correct, but as something to respect. Back then, Chelsea Simmons had not seemed unusual to him. She was simply steady. She didn't compete for attention in crowded rooms. She didn't insert herself into conversations just to be seen. She observed, absorbed, and responded only when necessary. There was a clarity to her presence that Logan once found grounding. But clarity to someone chasing recognition can begin to feel like absence. As Logan's career advanced incrementally at first, then with enough momentum to change how others treated him, his perception of value shifted. It wasn't sudden. It never is. It happened through small adjustments in how people spoke to him, how they deferred, how they included him in conversations that carried weight. And somewhere along that progression, he began to measure worth differently. Chelsea, who had never tried to match his outward ambition, became something he could no longer quantify in the language he now preferred. To others, she became easy to define. She's quiet. She doesn't really do much, does she? Logan's the one carrying everything. These were not statements spoken directly to Chelsea. They didn't need to be. They existed in the tone of conversations, in the way introductions were made, in the slight pauses that followed her name, as if more explanation should have come, but never did. Logan didn't correct them. At first, it was omission. Later, it became agreement. Margaret Hayes noticed it before anyone else. Logan's mother had always valued visibility. She understood the language of appearances long before Logan ever stepped into a boardroom. To her, Chelsea represented something unfinished, too reserved, too indistinct, too unwilling to assert a place in a hierarchy Margaret believed should always be clearly defined. She doesn't present well, Margaret had once said, her voice low but deliberate during a quiet dinner that Chelsea attended but was not fully included in. Logan hadn't disagreed. She's just different, he replied. Margaret studied him for a moment. Different doesn't build a future, Logan. Alignment does. Chelsea had heard enough to understand the direction of the conversation, even if no one turned toward her directly. She continued eating her posture, unchanged, her expression neutral. She did not respond. She did not defend herself. What she did instead was remember, not emotionally, structurally, the date, the context, the phrasing. Over time, patterns formed. Logan's calendar began to include meetings that extended beyond their stated purpose. His phone, once left casually on any surface, became something he kept within reach. Notifications were silenced more often. Conversations shifted when Chelsea entered a room. None of it was definitive on its own. Together, it became consistent. Chelsea did not confront him. She did not search through his belongings or demand explanations. That would have required him to respond to construct a version of truth in real time, to adjust his behavior accordingly. Instead, she allowed the pattern to continue uninterrupted, because patterns, when left alone, tend to reveal more than interruptions ever could. One evening, weeks before the anniversary, Chelsea sat at the dining table with her notebook open. The apartment was quiet. Logan had texted earlier that he would be late. Another meeting, another extension of a schedule that had become increasingly opaque. Chelsea wrote a time. 7:42 p.m. Below it, a note. Expense recorded as client dinner. Location inconsistent. She didn't underline it. She didn't circle it. She turned the page and wrote the next entry. Repeated transfer, same amount. 3 instances in 5 days. The notebook did not contain assumptions, only records. At work, Logan had begun speaking about the future with a certainty that outpaced his actual position. Once this restructuring goes through, he told a colleague over coffee, there's going to be a shift in leadership. People who understand how to move will move. His colleague nodded more out of habit than agreement. And you, the colleague asked. Logan smiled slightly. I won't be in the same place a year from now. He believed that. Not because it had been promised, because it aligned with the narrative he had built around himself. Vanessa Cole entered that narrative with precise timing. She worked within the same corporate environment, close enough to understand its dynamics, distant enough to avoid immediate scrutiny. She listened when Logan spoke. She affirmed his interpretations. She didn't challenge his assumptions. To Logan, that felt like compatibility. To Vanessa, it was opportunity. Their conversations began with work. They shifted gradually into something more personal, but always framed in the language Logan preferred: growth, transition, alignment. Chelsea's name appeared occasionally, not as a subject, as a limitation. She doesn't really fit where things are going, Logan said once, his tone measured, as if explaining a logistical constraint. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. She let the silence suggest agreement. That was enough. Back in the apartment, Chelsea's observations expanded. She noted the timing of Logan's messages, the intervals between them, the shifts in tone, the way certain phrases appeared more frequently when he was away versus when he was home. She reviewed bank statements, not for total amounts, but for patterns, recurring charges, inconsistencies in categorization. Small deviations that suggested intent rather than error. One afternoon, she noticed a charge that didn't align with any known business function. The amount was not large, but it repeated. Same merchant, same day of the week. She didn't question it. She recorded it. There was one moment, small, almost incidental, that confirmed more than any pattern had. Logan had left his phone on the kitchen counter while stepping into another room. It wasn't something he did often anymore. The screen lit up briefly, not a message, a notification from a banking app. Chelsea glanced at it not out of curiosity, but because it existed within her field of vision. A transfer. The same amount she had already recorded. She did not pick up the phone. She did not open the notification. She did not need to. The confirmation was already complete. Logan, meanwhile, was finalizing something he considered far more important. The anniversary. To him, it was not a celebration. It was a stage. He selected the restaurant carefully. Not too intimate, not too public. A space where attention could be drawn without becoming uncontrollable. He invited a small group of colleagues who would understand the significance of what he was about to do without questioning its morality. People who would interpret confidence as correctness. He arranged the timing, the entrance, the moment the papers would appear. It was in his mind, a controlled execution. Chelsea became aware of the plan without being told, not through a direct conversation, through fragments. A message Logan forgot to delete. A calendar entry labeled vaguely but positioned too deliberately. A call he took on the balcony, believing distance would soften the clarity of his words. She didn't listen for content. She listened for structure. And the structure was clear. On the morning of the anniversary, before leaving for the meeting that would redefine ownership of an entire corporate structure, Chelsea paused in the apartment doorway. She looked back once, not at Logan, who had already left, but at the space itself. There were no dramatic memories attached to it, no emotional anchors that demanded recognition, just a place where patterns had been observed, recorded, and completed. She turned off the light and closed the door behind her. By the time evening approached, everything that mattered had already been set in motion. Logan believed he was ending something. Chelsea knew something else had already ended long before. The difference between them was not knowledge. It was timing. And timing, when aligned with truth, rarely needs to announce itself. It simply arrives. At Hayes and Rowe, Holdings' confidence was often mistaken for control. The building itself reflected that illusion. Glass walls, open layouts, carefully curated spaces designed to suggest transparency and strength. From the outside, it looked like a company positioned for growth. Inside, the structure was more fragile than most employees understood. Logan Hayes moved through it as if it already belonged to him. He had learned which hallways mattered, which offices carried influence, and which conversations could be overheard if he positioned himself correctly. He understood proximity. He understood visibility. What he did not understand was ownership, not in the legal sense, not in the structural sense, and certainly not in the way power actually transferred within systems larger than individual ambition. That morning, he stepped into the office earlier than usual. There was energy in the air, not excitement, something quieter. Conversations that paused when he approached. Emails being checked more frequently. Assistants moving with slightly more urgency than routine required. To Logan, it felt like anticipation. To those who knew more, it felt like transition. He stopped by the desk of a colleague, Andrew Collins, who was scanning through a set of printed reports. "You see the numbers from last quarter?" Logan asked, casually leaning against the partition. Andrew nodded but didn't look up immediately. "Yeah. Restructuring's gonna hit fast," Logan continued. "They're not going to leave gaps at the management level." Andrew finally looked at him, expression neutral. "That's one way to look at it." Logan smiled slightly. "It's the accurate way." Andrew didn't respond. He returned his attention to the reports, flipping a page with deliberate focus. The conversation ended there, not because Logan had finished speaking, but because there was nothing more to engage with. Logan moved on, without noticing the silence he left behind. 2 floors above, in a conference room not listed on the public schedule, a smaller group had already gathered. Michael Grant stood near the window, reviewing a digital tablet. Daniel Brooks sat at the table, a laptop open, secure connection established. Evelyn Carter entered last, carrying a structured file that contained everything required to formalize a shift in control that most of the building would not fully understand until it was complete. "Board notification goes out at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow," Daniel said without looking up. "Internal distribution immediately after." Michael nodded. "Executive briefing at 8:30. Department heads at 9:00. Evelyn placed the file on the table. No deviation. The sequence matters. There was no discussion of uncertainty. No contingency planning in the visible sense. Everything had already been accounted for. "What about him?" Michael asked, glancing briefly at a line item on the tablet. Evelyn didn't need clarification. "He'll be informed with the rest of his division. No special handling." Daniel closed his laptop halfway, considering. "He's going to assume this benefits him." Evelyn allowed the smallest pause before responding. "Assumptions are not our responsibility." The room returned to quiet coordination. Chelsea Simmons was not present. She didn't need to be. Back on his floor, Logan had shifted his attention to something he found more immediately rewarding. Vanessa Cole. She stood near the break area, scrolling through her phone with practiced indifference. When Logan approached, she didn't look up right away. That, too, was part of the dynamic. "Busy morning?" he asked. Vanessa glanced at him, offering a slight smile. "Seems like it." Logan leaned against the counter, lowering his voice just enough to suggest privacy. "It's about to get more interesting." Vanessa tilted her head. That confident. Logan's expression didn't change. "I don't say things I'm not sure about." That wasn't entirely true, but it was consistent with the version of himself he preferred to present. Vanessa studied him for a moment, then asked, "So what happens after tonight?" Logan exhaled slowly, as if considering a question that had already been answered. "After tonight, he said everything becomes simpler. He didn't elaborate immediately. He let the statement exist, knowing she would interpret it in the way that most benefited him. "She's not going to make it difficult?" Vanessa asked. Logan gave a short, dismissive shake of his head. "Chelsea doesn't operate like that." He chose his words carefully, but the meaning was clear. He didn't see resistance as a possibility. Vanessa nodded, absorbing the implication. "And the company?" Logan's focus sharpened. "That's already moving in the right direction." He believed that, not because he had access to verified information, but because his interpretation of events aligned with his expectations. The restructuring discussions he had overheard, the changes in internal reporting lines, the increased presence of external consultants, he saw all of it as confirmation of upward movement. What he didn't see was context. What he didn't see was scale. Across the city, in a quieter space defined by order rather than display, Chelsea reviewed a final set of communications. Her apartment was still. No television, no background noise, just the soft movement of paper and the occasional vibration of her phone. A message from Daniel. Final filings confirmed. No outstanding conditions. Another from Evelyn. All documentation secured. You are fully protected. Chelsea read both, then placed the phone face down on the table. She opened the slim folder she had brought back from the meeting that morning. Inside were copies, not originals, of the executed documents, structured, labeled, and complete. She did not reread them. She already knew what they contained. Instead, she removed a single page, an internal summary prepared for her by Daniel. Not legal language, not technical breakdowns, just a clear outline of what had changed. Controlling interest, board authority, executive oversight. Chelsea placed the page back into the folder and closed it. There was no visible reaction, no satisfaction, no relief, just alignment. Later that afternoon, she received a call. "Everything is in place," Evelyn said. Chelsea stood by the window, looking out at a city that continued moving without awareness of the shift that had already occurred. "Tomorrow?" Chelsea asked. "Yes," Evelyn confirmed. "It will be formal by then. Today is transitional, quiet." Chelsea nodded, though the gesture wasn't visible. "Understood." There was a brief pause on the line. "You don't have to attend immediately," Evelyn added. "Your presence can be introduced later under more controlled conditions." Chelsea considered that for exactly the amount of time it required. "I'll attend," she said, not because she needed to assert anything, because timing mattered. As evening approached, the distance between perception and reality narrowed. Logan left the office early, something he rarely did. Not because of necessity, but because the evening required preparation. He checked his reflection more than once before leaving the building. Adjusted his tie, straightened his posture. Control to him was something that could be arranged. Meanwhile, Vanessa prepared in her own way. Not as a participant, but as a witness, positioned just close enough to observe the outcome she expected. At the apartment, Chelsea changed into a simple dress. Neutral color, clean lines. Nothing that would draw attention away from the moment itself. She did not bring the folder. She did not need it. Everything it represented was already in effect. By the time the sun set, the city had shifted into a different rhythm. Lights replaced daylight. Reflections deepened. Movement slowed just enough to make moments more visible. At the restaurant, final preparations were being made. At the office, systems were already aligning for the next day's announcement. In separate spaces under different assumptions, two people moved toward the same point in time. Logan believed he was about to define the future. Chelsea already had. The difference would not be explained. It would simply become evident. The first transfer had been small enough to ignore. Not insignificant, but ordinary in the way that business expenses often were. A dinner categorized under client relations. a hotel charge aligned with a supposed overnight meeting. Nothing that demanded immediate scrutiny. Chelsea Simmons had not flagged it. She had recorded it. That distinction mattered, because the second transfer appeared 3 days later. Same amount, different label. The third followed the next week, again adjusted just enough to avoid repetition in plain sight, but identical in structure when viewed across a longer timeline. Chelsea did not react. She opened her notebook and wrote, date, amount, category, location, no interpretation, no conclusion, only consistency. Logan Hayes, meanwhile, had already justified the pattern to himself. It wasn't theft, not in the way that word would imply. It was temporary, he told himself. An adjustment, a movement of resources that would be corrected once everything aligned in his favor. He had seen others do it, not openly, not formally, but enough to understand that boundaries in certain environments were flexible, especially for those positioned to move forward. The company wouldn't notice, or if it did, it wouldn't matter. That belief allowed him to proceed without hesitation. Vanessa Cole did not ask where the money came from. She didn't need to. The gifts were not extravagant enough to raise suspicion, but they were consistent, thoughtful, positioned as gestures rather than statements. A bracelet one week, a reservation at a private dining space the next. Always just within the range of plausible explanation. What's the occasion, she asked, once turning the bracelet slightly under the light. Logan smiled. Does there have to be one? Vanessa met his gaze, then looked back at the bracelet. No, she said. I suppose not. She understood the arrangement, not in detail, but in intention. And intention was often enough. Back at the apartment, Chelsea's process expanded. She did not limit herself to bank statements. That would have been too narrow. Instead, she began aligning timelines. When Logan claimed to be at work, she noted the timestamps of his messages. When he referenced meetings, she compared them against the structure of his known schedule. When expenses appeared, she mapped them against locations cross-referencing publicly available data, not for confirmation, but for correlation. Patterns began to emerge, not dramatic ones, subtle ones, consistent enough to suggest repetition. One evening, she sat at the dining table with her laptop open and her notebook beside it. On the screen, a series of transactions formed a quiet sequence. Not alarming in isolation, but when placed side by side, they created a rhythm that did not belong to legitimate business activity. She selected 3 entries and copied them into a separate document. Below them, she wrote a single line. Recurring allocation outside, stated purpose. She didn't highlight it. She didn't emphasize it. She saved the file and closed the laptop. The audio came later. Not intentional, not staged. Logan had been in the apartment speaking on the phone, unaware that the door to the hallway had remained slightly open. Chelsea had been in the adjacent room, not listening, not positioning herself to overhear, simply present within the same space. His voice carried just enough. It's temporary, Logan said, his tone lower than usual, but not cautious. Once the restructuring happens, it all resets. No one's going to trace small movements like that. There was a pause, then a quieter laugh. Relax, I know what I'm doing. Chelsea did not move. She did not step closer. She did not interrupt. But she did take her phone from the table beside her. Not to record immediately, to check something first. The state, one-party consent. She had confirmed it weeks earlier when the patterns had begun to form. Only then did she activate the recording. She did not capture the entire conversation. She didn't need to. Only enough. A fragment that aligned with everything else. When Logan ended the call and returned to the room, Chelsea's phone was already back on the table screen. Dark presence unremarkable. He didn't notice. From that point forward, her approach did not change. She did not gather more than necessary. She did not escalate. She allowed the behavior to continue. Because continuation meant clarity. And clarity, when documented correctly, required no interpretation. At work, Logan's confidence continued to expand. He began speaking more openly about the future. Not specifics, he didn't have those, but direction, movement, opportunity. "I've positioned myself well," he told Andrew Collins one afternoon. "When things shift, you either move with them or you get left behind." Andrew looked at him for a moment, then returned his attention to his screen. "And you're sure you know which way it's shifting?" Logan didn't hesitate. "I don't operate on uncertainty." Andrew said nothing. The silence that followed was not agreement. It was distance. Vanessa, on the other hand, provided something Logan found more useful. Validation. "You're different from the others," she said once, her tone soft but deliberate. "You actually see what's coming." Logan absorbed that without question, because it matched the version of himself he had already accepted. "And you?" he asked. Vanessa smiled slightly. "I know who to pay attention to." It was a simple exchange, but it reinforced everything Logan believed about his position. Back at the apartment, Chelsea reached the end of her documentation. There was no announcement, no moment of realization, just a point at which the pattern no longer required additional confirmation. She opened her notebook to the last page she had used. Below the previous entries, she wrote one final line. "Pattern established. Sufficient for review." She closed the notebook and placed it in the drawer. There was no satisfaction in the gesture. No visible shift. Only completion. The next step was not confrontation. It never had been. Instead, she contacted Evelyn Carter. "I have additional materials." Chelsea said, her voice steady, neutral. Evelyn didn't ask for details over the phone. "Send them through the secure channel." Chelsea did. Bank records, screenshots, the audio fragment. A summary document that aligned each element within a clear chronological structure. No assumptions, no accusations, just evidence. Evelyn reviewed everything without interruption. When she called back, her tone had shifted slightly, not emotionally, but in precision. "This is clean," she said. "Structured, admissible." Chelsea waited. "We'll incorporate it into the broader review," Evelyn continued. "It may not be necessary immediately, but it strengthens your position significantly." Chelsea nodded, though the gesture was unseen. "Understood." There was a brief pause. "You didn't confront him," Evelyn added. It wasn't a question. "No," Chelsea said. That was the correct decision. Chelsea didn't respond. She hadn't made the decision for validation. She had made it because confrontation changes behavior, and she had needed behavior to remain consistent. As the anniversary approached the two trajectories, Logan's and Chelsea's moved closer to intersection. Logan prepared for a moment he believed would define control. Chelsea finalized a process that had already defined outcome. Neither spoke to the other about what was coming. But the difference between them was no longer hidden. It was documented, structured, ready. On the afternoon of the anniversary, Chelsea stood in the apartment once more, the same stillness surrounding her as before. There were no decorations, no acknowledgement of the date. Only the quiet presence of a life that had already been measured, recorded, and brought to its natural conclusion. She picked up her phone. A message from Evelyn. "All materials integrated. You're fully protected." Chelsea read it once, then set the phone down. Outside, the city continued as it always did. Inside, nothing needed to change. Because everything already had. Logan Hayes believed in presentation. Not just appearance, but timing framing and control over how a moment would be perceived by others. The anniversary dinner in his mind was not simply a personal decision. It was a statement. A carefully constructed scene where every element would reinforce the version of reality he wanted others to accept. He arrived at the restaurant 2 hours early. The manager recognized him immediately and led him through the quiet space before the evening crowd settled in. Tables were already set with crisp white linens, polished glassware reflecting the soft gold of overhead lighting. The atmosphere was designed to feel intimate without being private, a balance Logan had chosen deliberately. "I want this table," he said, gesturing toward one positioned near the center of the room, visible from multiple angles, but not directly exposed to the entrance. The manager nodded. "Of course, sir. And the timing?" Logan continued. "Champagne comes out after I signal, not before?" "Yes, sir." Logan adjusted the placement of the chairs, slightly ensuring that Chelsea's seat faced outward, angled just enough that anyone nearby would have a clear view of her expression. He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. To him, control was often about details no one else would question. The guest list was intentional. Not close friends, not family, colleagues, acquaintances, individuals who existed within his professional orbit. People whose opinions shaped reputation, but who lacked the personal connection to challenge his behavior directly. Andrew Collins was invited, though Logan suspected he might not engage much. A few others from adjacent departments. Enough to create an audience, not enough to create resistance. Vanessa Cole was not formally included, but she knew where to be. A separate reservation positioned within sight of the main table allowed her to observe without becoming part of the narrative. It was a subtle arrangement, one Logan had not needed to explain. Vanessa understood positioning instinctively. Across the city, Chelsea Simmons moved through her own preparation without urgency. There was no performance in it, no attempt to match the scale of the evening Logan had designed. She selected a dress that carried no statement, soft, neutral, structured, without excess. The kind of choice that would not draw attention away from what was being said or what was about to be revealed through behavior rather than words. She did not bring the folder from earlier that day. She did not need documentation in her hands. Everything that mattered had already been placed where it needed to be, within legal channels, within secured systems, within processes that did not rely on visible confrontation. Instead, she carried only her phone, and the same stillness she had carried into every moment that had led here. In the late afternoon, her phone vibrated once. A message from Daniel Brooks. Board notice queued. Distribution at 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. Chelsea read it, then locked the screen. Another message followed shortly after this time from Evelyn Carter. All evidence integrated into case file. No exposure on your side. Chelsea acknowledged both with a single word. Understood. There was no further discussion, no need for reassurance. Everything had already been accounted for. Logan returned to his apartment briefly before the dinner. He moved through the space with a sense of anticipation that bordered on impatience. He checked his reflection more than once, adjusted his tie, reviewed the folder containing the divorce papers. The document itself was clean, structured, prepared through legal channels that ensured it would hold. He had chosen the terms carefully, not generous, not overtly aggressive. Balanced in a way that would allow him to appear reasonable while still maintaining control over the outcome. To him, it was a controlled exit. He placed the folder into a leather case, aligning it neatly. Then he paused. For a moment, he looked around the apartment. There was nothing in the space that challenged his decision. No visible tension. No unresolved conflict. Just a quiet environment that to him had become static. He interpreted that stillness as absence, not as completion. Chelsea returned home shortly after. Their timing overlapped, but only briefly. Logan was in the living room when she entered, already dressed, already positioned within the role he intended to play. "You're on time," he said, his tone neutral as if acknowledging a routine detail. "I usually am," Chelsea replied. There was no tension in her voice, no curiosity, no attempt to engage beyond what was necessary. Logan watched her for a moment, perhaps expecting something: uncertainty, anticipation, a question about the evening. None came. None. "You'll like the place," he said instead. "It's appropriate." Chelsea nodded once. "I'm sure it is." The conversation ended there. Not because it had resolved anything, because there was nothing either of them needed to say. They left the apartment together, but not as a unit. The space between them was not physical. It was structural. Logan moved with intention, his steps aligned with the outcome he believed he controlled. Chelsea moved with the same quiet precision she always had, unaffected by the narrative he had constructed. In the car, Logan checked his watch. Timing mattered. He reviewed the sequence in his mind: arrival, seating, opening conversation, presentation of documents, pause for reaction, control. Chelsea looked out the window. The city passed in reflections, light against glass, movement layered over stillness. She did not rehearse. She did not anticipate. She had already completed everything that required preparation. At the restaurant, the environment had shifted. The early quiet had given way to a low hum of conversation. Glassware clinked softly. Servers moved with practiced efficiency. The lighting remained warm, controlled, designed to create a sense of intimacy without isolation. Logan entered first. The manager approached immediately, guiding them to the table he had selected earlier. As they walked through the space, a few heads turned. Recognition, curiosity, nothing overt. Just enough to confirm that the room was aware. Chelsea followed without altering her pace. No hesitation, no visible reaction to the attention. They reached the table. Logan pulled out her chair, a gesture that to anyone watching would appear courteous. Chelsea sat, calm, composed, unremarkable. From across the room, Vanessa observed. She did not approach, she did not signal. But her presence was deliberate, positioned within sight, close enough to witness, distant enough to remain unchallenged. The initial moments of the table were quiet. Menus were presented. Water was poured. A server described the evening's specials with careful detail. Logan listened, but his attention was elsewhere. Timing, sequence, control. Chelsea listened as well. Not to the words, to the structure, the rhythm of the room, the positioning of people, the way attention moved without being directed. When the server stepped away, Logan placed his hands lightly on the table. He did not reach for the folder yet. That would come later. Instead, he began with something simpler. 3 years, he said. Chelsea met his gaze. Yes. Logan nodded as if confirming a detail already known. A lot changes in that time. Chelsea did not respond immediately. She allowed the statement to exist without interpretation. "It does," she said finally. Logan leaned back slightly, studying her. There was something in her expression, or perhaps the absence of something, that didn't align with what he had expected. No tension, no anticipation, just stillness. He interpreted it as resignation. He was wrong. Around them, the room continued its quiet motion. Conversations layered over one another. Glasses lifted and set down. Small gestures repeated across different tables, creating a pattern that felt continuous, uninterrupted. Within that pattern, Logan prepared to introduce disruption. He reached for the leather case. Not quickly, not dramatically, with intention. The moment had arrived, at least in his understanding of it. Chelsea watched the movement, not with concern, not with resistance, simply with awareness. Because for her, the moment had already passed. What remained was process. And process, once set in motion correctly, does not require force. It only requires time. Logan did not rush the moment. He let the silence stretch just long enough to draw attention without making it obvious. Around them, the soft rhythm of the restaurant continued cutlery against porcelain low conversations, folding into one another, but the space at their table began to feel slightly different. Not louder, not sharper, just more defined. He opened the leather case. The movement was deliberate. Practiced without rehearsal, yet structured enough to suggest control. He removed a thin stack of documents and placed them on the table between them, aligning the edges with careful precision. Chelsea's gaze lowered briefly. Not to read, to acknowledge. Logan rested his hand lightly on top of the papers, as if grounding them in place. "I wanted to do this properly," he said, his voice steady, measured, respectfully. Chelsea looked at him again. Her expression did not change. "Of course," she replied. The response was neutral, neither agreement nor resistance. Logan took that as permission to continue. "I think we both know," he said, "that things haven't been aligned for a while." He chose his words carefully, constructing a narrative that placed him in control without appearing overtly harsh. It was a tone he had practiced, firm but reasonable, detached but not cold. Chelsea listened. Not to the tone, to the structure. He was positioning himself as the one who had evaluated, decided, and now acted. "I've been thinking about this for some time," Logan continued. "About what makes sense moving forward, for both of us." Chelsea's hands rested lightly in her lap, still unmoved. Logan slid the documents forward. "These are the papers," he said. "Everything is outlined clearly, fairly." The word fairly lingered in the air for a moment. Chelsea placed her hand on the top page. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she asked a single question. "When were these prepared?" Logan paused just briefly. "A few weeks ago," he said. Chelsea nodded once. Then she opened the document. From across the room, Vanessa watched. Her posture remained relaxed, her expression composed, but her attention was fixed. She had positioned herself perfectly close enough to observe, distant enough to avoid being part of the scene. She saw the papers. She saw Chelsea's stillness, and she waited. At the table, Logan continued speaking. He did not wait for Chelsea to finish reading. "I've made sure the terms are reasonable," he said. "You'll have what you need to move forward." There was no emphasis on the final phrase, but the implication was clear. Chelsea turned a page. Her eyes moved across the text with quiet precision. Not scanning, not rushing, reading every line, every clause. Logan interpreted the silence as acceptance, or at least lack of resistance. "I don't want this to become complicated," he added. "There's no reason for it to be." Chelsea paused on a section. Her fingers rested lightly against the edge of the page. "What is the proposed timeline?" she asked. Logan blinked once. The question was not what he expected. "Standard," he replied. "Filing within the week. Finalization within 30 days, assuming there are no delays." Chelsea nodded. "And service?" she asked. Logan's brow tightened slightly. "It's already been initiated," he said. "This is just formal." Chelsea absorbed that without visible reaction. She turned another page. A few tables away, Andrew Collins shifted in his seat. He had accepted the invitation out of obligation more than interest, but now observing the exchange from a distance, something about it felt misaligned. Not the act itself, the tone. Logan's voice carried just enough to be heard without being intrusive. The words were controlled, structured, designed to present a certain image. But Chelsea's responses, they did not follow the expected pattern. No emotion, no argument, no visible impact. Just questions. Precise, procedural. Andrew glanced briefly toward another colleague at the table. No one spoke, but the shared awareness was there. Something about the moment was not unfolding the way Logan seemed to expect. Back at the center table, Logan leaned forward slightly. "I think it's better this way," he said. "For both of us." Chelsea finished the final page. She closed the document, placed her hand lightly on top of it. Then she looked at him. There was no accusation in her expression, no hurt, no visible shift at all. "What is the basis for the financial allocation?" she asked. Logan hesitated, not because he didn't have an answer, because he hadn't expected the question. "It's equitable," he said, "based on current assets." "And which assets?" Chelsea interrupted, her tone unchanged. The interruption was not sharp, but it was exact. Logan's jaw tightened slightly. "The ones that are relevant," he replied. Chelsea held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. Understood. She did not challenge him further. She did not argue. She did not reject the terms. Instead, she reached for her glass of water and took a small, measured sip. The movement was calm, unhurried. Logan exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. To him, the moment was progressing as expected. There was no resistance, no escalation, no scene. Exactly what he had intended. He glanced briefly around the room, aware of the subtle attention their table had drawn. Not overt, not disruptive, but present, witnessed. That mattered. He wanted it to matter. "I didn't want to do this privately," he said, returning his attention to Chelsea. "I think transparency is important." Chelsea set the glass down. "Is that what this is?" she asked. Logan's expression flickered just slightly. "Yes," he said. Chelsea considered that, then nodded once. "I see." There was no agreement in her voice, only acknowledgement. Vanessa watched the exchange carefully. There was something she couldn't quite define. Logan appeared confident, controlled. But Chelsea didn't appear affected, not in the way Vanessa had anticipated. There was no visible loss, no collapse, no attempt to hold on to something that was being taken away. Instead, there was a stillness that felt deliberate. Vanessa shifted slightly in her seat, not uncomfortable, just aware that the dynamic might not be as simple as it appeared. At the table, Logan reached for the champagne signal. A small gesture to the server. The bottle arrived within seconds, opened with quiet precision. 2 glasses were filled. Logan lifted his. "To clarity," he said. Chelsea looked at the glass, then at him. She did not lift hers. "Before I sign anything," she said calmly, "I'll need copies of all supporting financial records." Logan froze, just for a second. "Those aren't necessary," he replied. "They are," Chelsea said. Her tone did not change. There was no force behind it, no insistence, just a statement. Logan's grip on the glass tightened slightly. "We can handle that later," he said. "This is just the first step." Chelsea held his gaze. "No," she said quietly. "This is documentation." The words settled differently. He hadn't expected it. Not here, not like this. Around them, the room continued its quiet motion. But at their table, something had shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly to everyone. But enough. Enough for those paying attention to feel the change. Logan set his glass down. "You're overcomplicating this," he said. Chelsea shook her head once. "No," she replied. "I'm clarifying it." The distinction was subtle, but absolute. Logan leaned back again, forcing a small smile. "Chelsea," he said, his tone softening slightly, "there's no need to make this difficult." Chelsea's expression remained unchanged. "I'm not," she said, and she wasn't. From across the room, Andrew noticed the shift fully now. It wasn't in the words. It was in the balance. Logan was still speaking, still leading. But somehow the control he had intended to demonstrate was no longer entirely his. He couldn't explain it. But he could see it. At the table, Chelsea closed the folder. She did not push it back. She did not sign. She simply rested her hand on it. Calm, unmoved. And for the first time that evening, Logan felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. Because the reaction he had planned for, the one he had structured the entire evening around, had not occurred. And without it, the moment no longer belonged entirely to him. Chelsea looked at him once more. Not with challenge, not with defiance, but with the same quiet awareness she had carried from the beginning. The kind that does not need to announce itself, because it already understands the outcome. Logan tried to recover the rhythm. He adjusted his posture, leaned slightly forward again, and reached for the structure he had rehearsed in his mind. The sequence had been clear, present, explain, conclude. Control would come from continuity, from not allowing space for deviation. Chelsea had created that space without raising her voice. He chose to ignore it. "I think you're focusing on the wrong part of this," Logan said, his tone smoothing over the brief tension. "The details can be handled through attorneys. Tonight is about closure." Chelsea's hand remained resting lightly on the closed folder. "Closure requires clarity," she said. Her voice was not confrontational, but it did not yield. Logan exhaled through his nose, a small release of impatience he did not fully conceal. "You're going to have representation," he continued. "Everything will be reviewed. You'll be taken care of." The phrase hung there. Taken care of. Chelsea did not respond immediately. She allowed the words to settle, to exist exactly as he had framed them. Then she asked, "Based on which valuation?" Logan blinked. "The current one," he said. Chelsea tilted her head slightly, defined by whom Logan's jaw tightened. "The company's internal assessment," he replied, a touch more quickly than before. Chelsea nodded once, as if noting the answer rather than accepting it. "Understood." At the adjacent table, Vanessa shifted her position, her attention sharpening. This was not the exchange she had expected. Logan was still speaking with confidence, but the direction of the conversation, its structure, was no longer entirely his. Chelsea's questions did not escalate. They did not accuse. They simply redirected. And with each redirection, Logan spoke more. Vanessa recognized that pattern. People often revealed more when they believed they were still in control. Back at the table, Logan leaned back again, forcing a small, composed smile. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said. Chelsea shook her head just once. "I'm making it accurate," she replied. The distinction landed differently, not argumentative, final. Logan's fingers tapped lightly against the stem of his glass. A subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but enough to betray the shift beneath his surface. He changed approach. "Look," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "We've both known this wasn't working." Chelsea met his gaze. "We've known something wasn't working," she said. Logan seized on the phrasing. "Exactly," he replied. "And this is the logical next step." Chelsea did not challenge the word logical. Instead, she asked, "When did you decide that?" Logan paused. He had anticipated emotional resistance. He had prepared for denial, for pleading, for anger. He had not prepared for chronology. "A while ago," he said. Chelsea waited. The silence extended just long enough to require precision. "Several weeks," Logan added. Chelsea nodded. "And during those weeks," she continued, "you finalized these terms, yes?" Her gaze did not shift. "And initiated service." Logan hesitated just slightly. "Yes." Chelsea absorbed that. No visible reaction. But something in the air around the table changed again, not in volume, not in tone, but in weight. A server approached briefly, asking if they were ready to order. Logan waved him off with a polite gesture, not breaking eye contact with Chelsea. "Give us a few more minutes," he said. The server nodded, and stepped away. The interruption passed, but the pause it created lingered. Logan reached for his glass again, lifting it halfway before setting it back down. He needed to reassert direction. "This doesn't have to be adversarial," he said. "We can handle it cleanly, respectfully." Chelsea's expression remained steady. "I agree," she said. The agreement came easily. Too easily. Logan frowned slightly as if something about it didn't align with his expectation. "Good," he said. "Then we don't need to complicate things with unnecessary financial disclosures," Chelsea asked. The interruption was quiet, but exact. Logan's expression hardened. "That's standard," he said. Chelsea held his gaze. So is accuracy. From across the room, Andrew Collins leaned back in his chair, no longer pretending to focus on his own table's conversation. The shift was unmistakable now. Logan was still leading in volume, but Chelsea was defining the structure. And structure, Andrew knew, determined outcome. He glanced briefly at another colleague, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. They were seeing the same thing. Logan exhaled again, this time more noticeably. "Chelsea," he said, his tone tightening just slightly, "there's no reason to drag this out. You'll have what you need. You always have." Chelsea did not react to the implication. Instead, she asked, "What does that include?" Logan blinked. "The settlement," he said. "Support. Time to transition." Chelsea's gaze remained fixed. "And the basis for that support?" she asked. Logan's patience thinned. "It's fair," he repeated. Chelsea nodded slowly. "You've said that." The repetition landed. Logan's hand tightened briefly against the table. "You're questioning everything he said." Chelsea tilted her head slightly. "I'm identifying it," she replied. Vanessa watched more closely now, her earlier confidence replaced with something quieter. Observation. There was no confrontation happening. No raised voices. No scene. And yet the balance felt different. Logan's words were becoming more frequent, more detailed. Chelsea's remained minimal, but each one seemed to carry more weight. Vanessa shifted again, her posture no longer entirely relaxed. At the table, Logan leaned forward once more, lowering his voice. "This is what's best for both of us," he said. Chelsea did not respond immediately. She allowed the statement to exist. Then she asked, "Is that what you told her?" Logan froze. "Not completely, but enough." The question was not loud. It was not accusatory. It was specific. Who, he asked, though the answer was already clear. Chelsea's expression did not change. "You know who?" she said. The silence that followed was different from the others. It was no longer procedural. It was directional. Logan's jaw tightened. "That's not relevant," he said. Chelsea nodded once. "Not to this document," she agreed. "But to your statements, it is." Logan leaned back, a small, controlled movement. "You're making assumptions," he said. Chelsea shook her head. "I'm noting consistency," she replied. Around them, the room continued as it always had. But at their table, the pattern had shifted completely. Logan was no longer presenting. He was responding. And each response carried more than he intended. He changed strategy again, deflection. "This isn't about anyone else," he said. "It's about us." Chelsea's gaze remained steady. "Then why was it prepared before tonight?" she asked. Logan opened his mouth, then paused. The answer existed. But saying it would define something he had not planned to define here. "It needed to be ready," he said finally. Chelsea nodded. "Before or after you began reallocating funds?" she asked. The words were quiet, measured, but precise. Logan's expression shifted, just slightly. "Excuse me," he said. Chelsea held his gaze. "The transfers," she said. No elaboration, no accusation, just the word. Logan's pulse moved once sharply beneath the surface. "That's business," he said. Chelsea did not argue. She did not press. She simply said, "Then it will be documented as such." The statement was neutral, but it landed with finality. From across the room, Andrew's attention sharpened fully now. He didn't know the details, but he recognized the structure. This was no longer a conversation. It was a record. Logan sat back his control, slipping not visibly to everyone, but enough for those paying attention to feel it. "You're overthinking this," he said. Chelsea shook her head once. "No," she replied. "I'm finishing it." The difference between the two statements settled into the space between them. Logan's version implied continuation. Chelsea's implied conclusion. For the first time that evening, Logan realized something had shifted beyond his control. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Because the narrative he had prepared, the reaction he had expected, the outcome he had assumed, none of it was unfolding the way he had planned. And Chelsea, still silent, still composed, still unmoved, had not once needed to raise her voice to change the direction of the entire room. Chelsea did not leave the restaurant immediately. When the server returned again, she ordered something simple. A dish that required little attention, something that would not interrupt the rhythm of what was unfolding, but would allow the evening to continue, without drawing unnecessary focus to its conclusion. Logan watched her, trying to understand the decision. "You're staying?" he asked. Chelsea met his gaze briefly. "Yes." The answer carried no explanation, no justification, just presence. Logan leaned back slightly, uncertain how to interpret it. He had expected the moment to end with a clear emotional shift, withdrawal, reaction, resistance. Something that would confirm the finality of what he had presented. Instead, Chelsea remained. Calm, composed, engaged only in the ways she chose. The rest of the dinner moved forward with a quiet imbalance. Logan attempted to reclaim the narrative, speaking about practicalities, about timing, about next steps that would, in his view, proceed smoothly if handled correctly. Chelsea listened. She responded when necessary, but her responses no longer guided him. They defined boundaries. "I'll have counsel review everything," she said at one point. "That's standard," Logan replied. "Yes," Chelsea agreed. "It is." The exchange ended there. Not because it had resolved anything, but because nothing further was required. Vanessa remained where she was, watching. The dynamic she had expected, one of clear dominance of Logan, controlling both the conversation and its outcome, had not materialized. Instead, there was something quieter, more precise. Chelsea had not resisted, but she had not yielded. And that absence of reaction created a space Logan seemed unable to fill without revealing more than he intended. Vanessa adjusted her posture, her earlier certainty replaced with careful observation. By the time the check arrived, the moment Logan had constructed had dissolved into something he no longer fully controlled. He signed the bill without comment, his movements slightly more rigid than before. "We'll finalize everything soon," he said, as if restating the plan would restore its structure. Chelsea nodded once. "Through counsel," she replied. Logan exhaled. "Yes." They stood. The room did not react. There was no scene to observe, no clear marker of what had just occurred. Only a subtle awareness that something had shifted, though not in the way it had been intended. Outside, the air carried the cool weight of the city at night. Lights reflected off passing cars. Conversations spilled out from nearby doors. The world continued without acknowledgement of the quiet fracture that had just taken place. Logan turned toward Chelsea. "I'll send over the additional documents," he said. Chelsea looked at him. "Please do." There was nothing else to say. They did not leave together. and Logan walked toward his car. Chelsea remained on the sidewalk for a moment longer, her posture unchanged, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and walked in the opposite direction. She did not go home. Instead, she entered a building several blocks away, a space defined by quiet professionalism rather than display. Evelyn Carter was already there. The office was dimly lit, the kind of environment that prioritized function over atmosphere. A single conference room light remained on, casting a soft, focused glow over the table where documents had already been arranged. When Chelsea entered, Evelyn looked up. "It's done," she asked. Chelsea placed her phone on the table. "Yes." Evelyn studied her for a moment. "No complications." Chelsea shook her head once. No, that was not entirely accurate, but it was sufficient. Evelyn nodded and gestured toward the documents. "We've integrated everything you provided earlier," she said. "The financial records, the timeline, the audio." Chelsea took a seat. "Good." Evelyn opened a file, turning it slightly so both of them could view it. "The structure is clear," she continued. "His actions, his statements, the sequence of events, it aligns." Chelsea glanced at the pages, not reading, confirming. "There's no need to escalate immediately," Evelyn added. "We proceed through standard channels. Let the process define the outcome." Chelsea nodded, understood. There was a brief pause. Evelyn closed the file. "You didn't reveal anything tonight," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," Chelsea replied. That was the right decision. Chelsea did not respond. She had not withheld information as a strategy. She had simply allowed the process to continue without interruption. Across the city, Logan was already moving in the opposite direction. He had not gone home either. Instead, he met Vanessa at a private lounge not far from the restaurant. The space was quieter, more controlled, designed for conversations that did not require an audience. Vanessa looked up as he approached. "Well?" she asked. Logan sat down, adjusting his jacket. "It's done," he said. Vanessa studied him. She signed. Logan hesitated. "Not yet," he replied. "But she will." Vanessa leaned back slightly. "You're sure?" Logan nodded, though the certainty was no longer as immediate as it had been earlier. "She didn't argue," he said. "She didn't push back." Vanessa considered that. "That doesn't mean she agrees," she said. Logan dismissed the implication with a small wave of his hand. "It's procedural," he replied. "She'll have someone review it. Then it's finalized." Vanessa watched him more carefully now. There was something else she said. Logan's expression tightened slightly. "What, the way you're saying it," Vanessa replied. "It doesn't sound finished." Logan exhaled. "It is," he said. But the word lacked the same clarity it had carried earlier. Back in Evelyn's office, Chelsea stood. "There's nothing further tonight," she said. Evelyn nodded. "We'll proceed in the morning." Chelsea picked up her phone. "Send me the final structure once it's filed," she said. "You'll have it." Chelsea paused for a moment, then added, "Include the internal review timeline." Evelyn's expression sharpened slightly. "Of course." Chelsea nodded once and turned toward the door. Outside, the city had quieted just enough to make the movement feel more deliberate. Chelsea walked without urgency, her pace steady, her posture unchanged. There was no visible release, no emotional shift, just continuation. At the lounge, Logan finished his drink. Vanessa watched him, her earlier confidence replaced with something more cautious. "You're sure everything's clean?" she asked. Logan frowned slightly. "What do you mean, the company?" she said. "The restructuring. Your position." Logan straightened. "It's solid," he replied. "I've seen how things are moving." Vanessa held his gaze. "Have you?" she asked. The question lingered. Logan didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, The certainty he had relied on all evening felt less complete. Across the city, systems were already aligning, emails scheduled, notifications prepared, processes set to activate at a specific time. No announcement, no warning, just transition. Chelsea reached her apartment and entered without turning on the main lights. The space remained as it had been, orderly, still, complete. She placed her phone on the table and stood for a moment in the quiet. There was nothing left to prepare, nothing left to anticipate. Everything that mattered had already been set into motion. And unlike the moment Logan had tried to control, this one required no audience, no performance, no explanation, only time. At 7:59 a.m., the building at Hayes and Rowe Holdings felt like any other morning. By 8:00, it wasn't. The first emails arrived without sound. No alert tones. No visible signal that anything unusual had occurred. Just a quiet shift, as inboxes refreshed across departments' subject lines, appearing with the same neutral precision. Notice of ownership transition effective immediately. For a moment, nothing changed. People continued typing. Coffee cups were lifted. Conversations carried on in low routine tones. Then someone opened the email, and then another. Within minutes, the atmosphere altered, not dramatically, not loudly, but in a way that could be felt more than heard. Heads tilted toward screens, brows tightened slightly. Messages began moving faster between internal channels. Logan Hayes walked into the building at 8:12 a.m., unaware that the structure he believed he understood had already changed. He nodded to the receptionist, passed through the security gate, and made his way toward the elevators, with the same measured confidence he carried every day. His reflection followed him in the mirrored panels, controlled, composed, aligned with the version of himself he expected others to see. Inside the elevator, two employees stood side by side, both focused on their phones. Neither greeted him. Logan noticed the silence but dismissed it. People were busy. That was all. On his floor, the shift became more visible. Conversation stopped when he approached. Not abruptly, just enough to create space. Andrew Collins was already at his desk, a printed copy of the email lying flat in front of him. He didn't look up immediately when Logan arrived. "Morning," Logan said, setting his bag down. Andrew nodded once. "Morning." There was a pause. Logan glanced at the paper. "What's that?" he asked. Andrew hesitated, then turned the document slightly so Logan could see the header. "Came through at 8, he said. Logan leaned in, scanning the first few lines. Hayes and Rowe Holdings has undergone a controlling interest acquisition. He stopped reading. Not because he had reached the end, because the words did not align with his expectations. "What is this?" he asked. Andrew watched him carefully. "Ownership transition," he said, "effective immediately." Logan straightened. "That doesn't make sense," he replied. "There hasn't been any." He stopped himself because there had been signs, consultants, meetings he hadn't been included in, shifts in reporting structures that had been explained vaguely. He had interpreted them as preparation for growth, not acquisition. "Who's the buyer?" Logan asked. Andrew shook his head slightly. "It's not listed directly. It's through a holding structure." Logan's jaw tightened. "That's not how this works," he said. Andrew didn't respond, because it was exactly how it worked. At 8:27 a.m., another email arrived. Mandatory executive briefing attendance required. Logan's name was on the list. So were the names of every manager at his level and above. He checked the time, 8:30, 3 minutes. "They're moving fast," he said, more to himself than to Andrew. Andrew folded the paper in front of him. "They already moved," he replied. Logan walked toward the conference room with a sense of urgency he did not fully acknowledge. His mind began assembling explanations. Restructuring, external investment, temporary oversight. Anything that maintained the trajectory he had already accepted. Inside the room, the atmosphere was controlled. Not tense, not chaotic, just precise. Executives sat in measured positions, their attention directed toward the front, where Evelyn Carter stood beside a projection screen. Daniel Brooks was seated at the table, laptop, open documents aligned. Michael Grant stood near the side, reviewing something on a tablet. Logan took a seat, scanning the room. No one spoke to him directly. At 8:30 exactly, Evelyn began. "Thank you for your prompt attendance," she said. "This will be brief." Her voice carried authority without emphasis. "The company has undergone a change in controlling ownership, effective this morning. All operations will continue without interruption. Governance adjustments will be implemented in phases beginning immediately." Logan listened. The words were clear, structured, but they did not include what he needed. "Who's the buyer?" someone asked from the far end of the table. Evelyn paused, then answered. "The controlling interest has been acquired through a private holding entity. Representation for that entity is present." Logan's focus sharpened. Representation, present. He glanced toward the door. It opened. Chelsea Simmons entered the room. The shift was immediate. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Chelsea walked in with the same calm precision she had carried into every moment before this one. Her posture was upright. Her expression composed, her presence understated in a way that did not invite attention, but commanded it once recognized. Evelyn gestured toward her. "This is Miss Chelsea Simmons," she said. "She will be representing the controlling interest moving forward." No additional explanation. None was needed. Logan did not move. His body remained still, but something beneath that stillness fractured. Not visibly. Not in a way that anyone in the room would describe as a reaction. But internally, the alignment he had relied on, his assumptions, his expectations, the narrative he had constructed, began to collapse under the weight of a single undeniable fact. Chelsea took a seat. Not across from him, not beside him, at the head of the table. No one spoke for a moment, because there was nothing to clarify. The structure of the room had already done that. Evelyn continued. "All reporting lines remain in place for now. Individual reviews will be conducted as part of the transition process. Further communication will be distributed by end of day." Her tone did not change. This was not a reveal. It was a procedure. Logan's eyes remained fixed on Chelsea. She did not look at him. Not immediately. She reviewed a document in front of her, her movement steady, unaffected by the weight of the moment. To everyone else in the room, this was business. To Logan, it was something else entirely. He spoke, not loudly, but enough to interrupt the flow. "This doesn't make sense," he said. The room did not react. Evelyn looked at him briefly. "It does," she replied. Logan's gaze shifted between them. "Chelsea," he began. Evelyn raised a hand slightly. "Questions will be addressed through proper channels," she said. Logan stopped, not because he accepted the response, because the structure of the room did not allow him to continue. He had no authority here, not anymore. Chelsea finally looked at him, just once. Her expression was the same as it had been the night before, calm, unchanged. But now, the context had shifted, completely. There was no need for explanation, no need for confrontation. Everything that needed to be understood was already visible. The meeting continued. Logan heard the words, but they no longer aligned into meaning. Governance, review, compliance. All terms he had used before. All concepts he believed he understood. Now they existed within a structure he did not control. At 8:52 a.m., the meeting ended. People stood. Chairs moved quietly against the floor. Conversations began again, low and controlled, but different now. Logan remained seated for a moment longer. Not frozen, not paralyzed, just recalibrating. When he finally stood, the room had already shifted around him. Chelsea was speaking with Evelyn. Daniel was organizing documents. Michael had stepped outside. No one approached Logan. No one acknowledged him directly. He was still there, but no longer central. As he moved toward the door, he glanced back once. Chelsea did not look up. She didn't need to. The moment had already passed. And unlike the one he had tried to create the night before, this one required no audience, no performance, no explanation, only recognition. The room did not empty all at once. People left in measured intervals, each exit quiet, deliberate, as if the structure that had just been established required a certain respect in how it was acknowledged. Chairs were returned to their original positions. Folders were gathered. Conversations resumed in low tones, but no one raised their voice. Logan Hayes remained near the doorway longer than necessary, not because he had something to say, because he had not yet found a position within what had just occurred. He watched as Chelsea Simmons stood at the head of the table reviewing a set of documents with Evelyn Carter. There was no visible tension between them. No urgency, just process, alignment, completion of tasks that had clearly been prepared long before this morning. To anyone observing without context, it would appear routine. To Logan, it was incomprehensible. He stepped back into the hallway. The corridor outside the conference room was quieter than usual. Not empty, but controlled. Employees moved with a slightly altered awareness, glancing toward the closed door, then away again. Logan walked toward his office, his pace steady, though not entirely anchored. Inside, he closed the door behind him. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself to stop moving. The silence in the room was different from the one he had known before. It was not absence, it was weight. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. Emails had multiplied. Notifications stacked in layers, each one referencing the same shift in language. Transition, review, compliance. Words that had once felt abstract now carried specific implications. His name appeared in several threads, not as a decision-maker, as a subject. A message from Human Resources. Please be advised that all expense accounts are under temporary audit review as part of the ownership transition. Logan's jaw tightened. Another message. Department-level financial activity will be assessed for alignment with internal policy standards. He closed the email. Not because he had finished reading, because he understood enough. A knock at the door. Logan looked up. Andrew Collins stood on the other side, hand still raised slightly from the motion. "Can I come in?" Andrew asked. Logan nodded once. Andrew entered, closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Andrew said, "You didn't know. It wasn't a question." Logan leaned back in his chair. "No," he said. Andrew nodded slowly. "They moved quietly," he added. Logan gave a short, humorless breath. Clearly. Andrew studied him for a moment. "You should review your accounts," he said, "before they do." Logan's eyes shifted slightly. "They're already reviewing," he replied. Andrew didn't argue, because that was also clear. He hesitated, then added, "This isn't just structural, it's procedural." Logan understood what he meant. This was not about hierarchy. It was about documentation, process, record. Andrew moved toward the door, pausing briefly before opening it. "They're not going to handle this informally," he said. Then he left. Back in the conference room, Chelsea remained. The initial briefing had ended, but the work had not. Evelyn Carter stood beside her, reviewing a set of internal reports that had already begun to circulate. Preliminary compliance flags are consistent with what we expected, Evelyn said. Nothing outside projection. Chelsea nodded. And individual reviews, she asked. Scheduled, Evelyn replied. Starting this afternoon. Chelsea glanced at the document. Prioritize financial activity within the last quarter, she said. Evelyn's expression remained neutral. Already in motion, there was no pause for reflection. No acknowledgement of the personal dimension underlying the data. This was not a confrontation. It was a continuation. Daniel Brooks entered the room carrying a tablet. Expense reports are being pulled, he said, cross-referenced with internal approvals. Chelsea looked up briefly. Any anomalies, she asked. Daniel hesitated just slightly. Several, he said, including repeated transfers within one division. He didn't specify which. He didn't need to. Chelsea nodded once. Proceed. There was no emphasis in the instruction, no indication that the anomalies carried personal relevance, only alignment with process. At 10:15 a.m., Logan's phone vibrated. A message from Vanessa. What's happening? He stared at the screen for a moment before responding. Transition. New ownership. The reply came quickly. Does that affect you? Logan's fingers hovered over the screen. Yes, he typed, then paused. He deleted the message. Rewrote it. Not directly, he sent it. Vanessa responded. Are you sure? Logan looked at the message. Then set the phone face down on his desk. He did not answer. By late morning, the shift within the company had stabilized into a new pattern. Meetings were rescheduled. Reports were redirected. Authority lines adjusted without announcement. No one resisted. Not because they agreed, because the structure did not allow for resistance. At 11:40 a.m., Logan received another email. Subject line: internal review, required attendance. The body was concise. Please attend a scheduled review session regarding departmental financial activity. Time 10 p.m. Location: conference room B. No additional context, no explanation. Logan read it twice, then closed his laptop. At 12:55 p.m., he stood outside conference room B. The door was closed. Inside, he could hear nothing. He adjusted his posture, straightened his jacket, and opened the door. The room was smaller than the one from earlier, more contained. Evelyn Carter sat at the table. Daniel Brooks was beside her, laptop open. A recorder sat in the center. Not hidden, not emphasized, just present. Chelsea was already seated. Logan stepped inside. No one stood. No one greeted him. Evelyn gestured toward the empty chair across from them. Mr. Hayes, she said, please have a seat. Logan did. The door closed behind him. The room settled into stillness. Evelyn began. This is a procedural review, she said. Standard as part of the ownership transition. Logan nodded once. Understood. His voice was controlled, measured, but the structure of the room was different from the one the night before. There was no audience, no performance, only record. Daniel turned the laptop slightly. On the screen, a series of transactions appeared. Dates, amounts, categories. Logan recognized them immediately. Not individually, collectively. We've identified several entries that require clarification, Daniel said. His tone was neutral, unbiased. Logan leaned forward slightly. Those are business expenses, he said. Evelyn did not respond immediately. She allowed the statement to settle. Then asked, can you provide supporting documentation for each? Logan hesitated. Not with me, he said. Evelyn nodded. You'll have the opportunity to submit them, she replied. Her tone remained even. Until then, they are under review. Chelsea remained silent. Her hands rested lightly on the table. Her gaze steady. Not on the screen, on Logan. He felt it, not as pressure, as awareness. The same stillness from the night before, unchanged, but now positioned within a structure that did not belong to him. "This is standard," Logan said, his voice tightening slightly. "Routine." Evelyn nodded. "Yes," she said, "it is." The agreement carried no reassurance, only confirmation. Logan leaned back. His mind moved quickly, assembling explanations, justification structures that could reframe the data in a way that aligned with his original narrative. But the narrative no longer held. Because this was not interpretation, it was record. Chelsea spoke. "For the first time since the meeting began, please ensure all submissions are complete," she said. Her tone was calm, unchanged. Logan looked at her. There was no accusation in her expression, no emotion, only process. And in that moment, he understood something he had not fully grasped the night before. This was not a confrontation he could win, because it had never been built as one. It had been built as a system, and systems once aligned do not require force. They require only time. The room remained still after Chelsea spoke. No one acknowledged the weight of her words, yet they settled into the structure of the meeting with quiet finality. This was not a conversation built on persuasion. It was a process built on sequence. Daniel Brooks adjusted the screen again. A new set of entries appeared, more detailed this time. Timestamps aligned with specific days. Locations mapped against known business activity. Categories that had been labeled one way now presented within a broader context that made their inconsistencies visible without commentary. Logan recognized them, not because they were unfamiliar, because they had once seemed small enough to ignore. "Let's proceed one at a time," Evelyn Carter said. Her voice remained steady, neutral, untouched by implication. March 12th. Expense categorized as client engagement dinner. She looked up briefly. "Can you identify the client?" Logan leaned forward slightly. "It was a meeting," he said, "with a potential contact." Evelyn nodded. Name Logan hesitated. "It wasn't formalized," he replied. Evelyn made a note. Understood. There was no immediate challenge, no correction, just documentation. Daniel moved to the next entry. March 19th. Same amount, different category. Travel accommodation. Logan's jaw tightened slightly. That was part of the same sequence, he said. Follow-up discussion. Daniel glanced at Evelyn, then back to the screen. Location differs from the initial entry, he said. Logan exhaled. It wasn't finalized, he repeated. Details changed. Evelyn nodded once. Noted. Again, no confrontation, only record. The pattern continued. Each entry presented. Each response received. Each gap noted without emphasis. Logan answered as consistently as he could, aligning each explanation with the one before it, maintaining a structure that to him still felt defensible, but the structure around him was different. Because his answers were no longer shaping the narrative. They were being placed within one. Chelsea did not interrupt. She did not add detail. She did not clarify or expand. Her presence alone was sufficient, not as pressure, as context. At one point, Daniel paused. "There is a recurring transfer," he said, his tone unchanged. Same amount, multiple instances over a 3-week period. He turned the screen slightly. The entries appeared in sequence, clean, aligned, undeniable. Logan's eyes moved across them. He did not respond immediately. "Can you explain the purpose of these transfers?" Daniel asked. Logan leaned back. "They were temporary allocations," he said. "Internal adjustments." Evelyn looked at him. "Authorized by whom?" Logan hesitated. "They didn't require authorization," he replied. Evelyn made another note. "All financial reallocations require documentation," she said. We'll need that. Logan's voice tightened. I can provide it, he said. Evelyn nodded. Please do. The recorder on the table remained untouched. No one referred to it. But its presence defined the room. This was not memory. It was record. After a brief pause, Evelyn closed the file in front of her. We'll move to the next category, she said. Daniel adjusted the screen again. A different type of data appeared. Communication logs, time-stamped, structured. Logan's posture shifted slightly. Emails and message records have been reviewed in alignment with financial activity, Daniel said. Logan's gaze sharpened. Reviewed how he asked. Daniel met his eyes briefly. Within compliance parameters, he replied. The answer was sufficient, not detailed, not defensive, just final. Evelyn spoke again. There are inconsistencies between stated purpose and recorded communication, she said. We'll need clarification on those as well. Logan exhaled slowly. This is excessive, he said. We're talking about minor expenses. Evelyn did not react to the tone. We're talking about alignment, she replied. The distinction was precise and immovable. Chelsea's gaze remained steady. She did not look at the screen. She did not need to. Everything that mattered had already been seen, organized, and placed within the structure now unfolding. Logan shifted in his chair. You're building this into something it's not, he said. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. We're identifying what it is, she replied. The phrasing echoed Chelsea's from the night before. Not intentionally, but accurately. The room fell into a brief silence. Not uncomfortable, not uncertain, just complete. Then Daniel spoke again. There is one additional item, he said. He tapped the screen. An audio file appeared. Logan's focus tightened. What is that, he asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked to Evelyn. She nodded once. Play it, she said. The sound was brief, clear, undistorted. Once the restructuring happens, it all resets. No one's going to trace small movements like that. Logan's voice, recognizable, unaltered. The recording ended. No one spoke. The silence that followed was different from the others. Not procedural, not transitional, final. Logan's posture remained upright, but something beneath it shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. Context matters, he said. Evelyn nodded. It does, she replied. You'll have the opportunity to provide it. Her tone did not change. No accusation, no emphasis, just process. Chelsea remained still, her expression unchanged. She did not look at Logan. She did not need to, because the moment did not belong to either of them anymore. It belonged to the record. Evelyn closed the file. This concludes the initial review, she said. Further documentation can be submitted through counsel. Logan nodded once. Understood. The word came easily, but it did not carry the same meaning it had before. He stood. Not abruptly, not slowly, just enough to signal completion. The door opened. The hallway waited. Chelsea remained seated. Daniel began organizing the files. Evelyn reviewed her notes. The process continued. Logan stepped out into the corridor. The door closed behind him. The sound was soft, but definitive. Inside the room, nothing changed, because nothing needed to. Everything had already been established. And outside, for the first time, Logan understood this was no longer about what he could say, or how he could explain, or what he could control. It was about what had already been recorded, aligned, and set into motion. And that kind of structure does not reverse. It only proceeds. The hallway felt longer than it had that morning. Logan Hayes walked without slowing, but not with direction either. The rhythm he had relied on, meetings, decisions, conversations that reinforced his position, no longer aligned around him. People moved as they always had, but their attention shifted just enough to create distance. Not avoidance, recognition. He reached his office and closed the door behind him with more force than necessary. The sound was contained, absorbed by the structure of the room, leaving no trace beyond its immediate space. For a moment he stood there, not thinking, not reacting, just recalibrating. Then he moved to his desk and opened his laptop. The inbox had changed again. More messages, more language he recognized, but now positioned differently. Pending review. Submission required. Policy alignment. Each phrase carried weight, not because of what it said, but because of what it implied. He opened one message. A formal notice from compliance. Based on preliminary findings, certain financial activities have been flagged for further assessment. You are required to submit supporting documentation within 48 hours. 48 hours. The numbers settled into his awareness with quiet precision. Enough time to respond. Not enough time to reconstruct. He closed the message, opened another. Human Resources. Please be advised that employment status may be subject to review pending the outcome of compliance evaluation. Maybe. Subject to. Language designed to remain neutral, but not uncertain. Logan leaned back in his chair. His hands rested on the armrests, fingers still as if movement itself required decision. He had always believed that control came from anticipation, from seeing where things were going before others did, from aligning himself with momentum. Now, the momentum existed. But it was not his. His phone vibrated. Vanessa, call me. He stared at the screen for a moment, then picked up the phone and stepped toward the window. He didn't sit. He didn't lean. He stood. The call connected. What's going on? Vanessa asked immediately. Her voice carried something new. Not curiosity, concern. Logan exhaled slowly. There's a review, he said. What kind of review? Internal, he replied. Standard. There was a pause on the other end. That doesn't sound standard, Vanessa said. Logan's gaze moved across the city outside the glass. It is, he said. They're just being thorough. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. Then quieter, and Chelsea Logan's expression tightened. She's involved, he said. Involved. How? Logan paused, then answered. She's representing the new ownership. The silence that followed was longer this time. Vanessa absorbed the information. You're serious, she said. Yes. Another pause. Does she know? Vanessa asked. Logan didn't need clarification. Yes, he said. The words settled between them. Vanessa's voice shifted again. What are you going to do? Logan looked down at his desk, at the open laptop, at the messages waiting. I'll handle it, he said. But the certainty was no longer immediate. Back in the conference room, the process continued without interruption. Chelsea remained seated, reviewing the final summary Evelyn had prepared. The structure was complete. Financial records aligned. Communication logs cross-referenced. Audio documentation integrated. There were no gaps, no inconsistencies in the record itself, only in the actions it reflected. Evelyn closed the file. This is sufficient, she said. Chelsea nodded once, and next steps, she asked. Submission to internal governance, Evelyn replied, followed by formal determination. Chelsea considered that. Timeline 48 hours for response, Evelyn said. Then review. Chelsea's gaze remained steady. Proceed. Daniel Brooks gathered the remaining documents. Everything is secured, he said. No exposure. Chelsea acknowledged him with a slight nod. Good. There was no further discussion. No need to revisit what had already been completed. The process had moved beyond preparation. Now it would move through resolution. At 2:30 p.m., Logan left his office. Not because he had decided to, because remaining there no longer served a purpose. He walked through the floor aware of the subtle shifts in attention around him. Conversations that paused, glances that redirected. Not overt, not confrontational, just adjusted. He reached the elevator and pressed the button. Waited. The doors opened. He stepped inside, alone. As the elevator descended, the reflection in the mirrored panel no longer aligned with the one he had seen that morning. The posture was the same. The expression controlled. But the context had changed. And without context, control becomes surface. Nothing more. When the doors opened, he stepped into the lobby. The same marble floors, the same quiet movement. But the space felt different. Not because it had changed. Because he had. Outside, the air carried the weight of the afternoon. Not heavy, just present. Logan walked without direction for several blocks before stopping. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and opened his messages. Vanessa had sent another. "Are we okay?" He stared at the words, then locked the screen without responding. Across the city, Chelsea stepped out of the building where the review had taken place. The afternoon light was steady, casting clean lines across the street. She paused for a moment, not to reflect, but to align her next movement. Her phone vibrated once. A message from Evelyn. Submission confirmed. Awaiting response. Chelsea read it, then replied. Understood. She placed the phone back into her bag and began walking. Her pace unchanged, her posture the same. There was no visible shift, no indication that anything had reached a climax. Because for her, the moment had never been about escalation, only completion. Back at Hayes and Rowe, the structure held. Processes moved forward, reviews scheduled, decisions pending. No one rushed, no one delayed. Everything followed the path it had been set upon. By evening, Logan returned to his apartment. The space was quiet, unchanged, but not familiar. He placed his keys on the table and stood in the center of the room. There was no immediate action to take, no conversation to control, no narrative to shape, only time, 48 hours. He moved to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and paused. Inside, among other things, was the notebook Chelsea had used. He had never opened it before, never considered it relevant. Now he looked at it differently, not as an object, as a possibility. He closed the drawer, without touching it. Across the city, Chelsea entered her apartment. She placed her bag on the table, removed her phone, and set it beside it. The space welcomed her the same way it always had. Quiet, ordered, complete. She moved through it without interruption, her actions aligned with routine rather than reaction. There was nothing to revisit, nothing to reconsider. Everything had already been placed where it needed to be. And somewhere between those two spaces, between what had been assumed and what had been recorded, the outcome no longer depended on either of them. It depended on process, on structure, on time. And time once aligned with truth does not hesitate. It proceeds. The 48 hours did not pass slowly. They passed with precision. At Hayes and Rowe Holdings, the review process moved forward without interruption. No announcements were made beyond what was required. No speculation was encouraged. Each department continued its operations within a structure that had already adapted to new oversight. Documentation was submitted, reviewed, cross-referenced, aligned. Nothing accelerated, nothing stalled. Logan Hayes spent the first evening attempting to reconstruct. He sat at his desk in the apartment laptop, opened multiple windows layered across the screen. Bank statements, internal reports, fragments of emails all arranged in a way that suggested control but lacked coherence. He tried to map his own actions back into a structure that would hold under scrutiny. The problem was not the individual decisions. It was their consistency. Each transfer, each adjustment, each assumption had made sense in isolation. Together they formed a pattern. And patterns, once defined, do not dissolve through explanation. They require contradiction. Logan had none. He drafted responses, deleted them, rewrote them. Each version attempted to reframe intent, to reduce significance, to align his actions with acceptable margins. But every attempt returned to the same limitation. The record existed independently of his explanation. At midnight, he closed the laptop. Not because he was finished, because there was nothing left to rearrange. Across the city, Chelsea Simmons did not review anything. She had already completed her part. Her evening moved through routine. A quiet meal, a brief review of messages, a single call with Evelyn Carter lasting less than 5 minutes. All submissions received, Evelyn said. Review in progress. Chelsea listened. Timeline unchanged, she asked. Yes. Chelsea nodded, understood. The call ended. No additional questions. No need for follow-up. The next morning, Logan returned to the office. The environment had stabilized. Not in his favor, but in structure. People no longer avoided him. They acknowledged him. Briefly, professionally, as one element within a system undergoing evaluation. He took his seat, opened his laptop, waited. At 10:03 a.m., the email arrived. Subject: Preliminary Determination, Internal Review. Logan opened it. The language was controlled, precise. Based on submitted materials and internal records, the review has identified inconsistencies between reported financial activity and documented authorization procedures. He continued reading. Further evaluation is required. Pending final determination, certain privileges will be temporarily suspended. His access had already changed. He had noticed it earlier. Restricted files, limited permissions. Now it was formal. A second message followed. Human Resources. Please attend a follow-up meeting at 2:00 p.m. No elaboration, no context, just instruction. Logan leaned back in his chair. The sequence was clear, not in detail, in direction. At 1:58 p.m., he stood outside the same conference room. Conference Room B. The door was already closed. He adjusted his jacket, his posture the same way he had before the anniversary dinner. The same instinct, different context. He opened the door. Inside the structure remained unchanged. Evelyn Carter, Daniel Brooks, a representative from Human Resources, Chelsea Simmons. Logan took his seat. No one spoke immediately. The silence was not deliberate. It was procedural. Evelyn began. The review has progressed, she said. We'll outline the current position. Daniel turned the screen slightly. A summary appeared. Concise, structured. Logan recognized the entries, not as fragments, as a complete sequence. The identified activities do not align with internal authorization protocols, Daniel said. His tone remained neutral. No emphasis, no interpretation. The HR representative spoke next. Based on these findings, your role is under formal review. Effective immediately, your responsibilities are suspended pending final determination. Logan listened. He did not interrupt, because there was nothing to interrupt. Evelyn continued. You will have the opportunity to submit any additional documentation within the remaining review period. Logan nodded once. Understood. The word came easily now, not because it carried acceptance, because it carried recognition. Chelsea spoke last. "Ensure all materials are complete," she said. Her tone unchanged. No emphasis, no personal inflection. Logan looked at her. For the first time since the process began, there was no attempt to interpret her expression, no expectation of reaction, only acknowledgement. The meeting ended. No conclusion, no final statement, just continuation. Outside, the hallway felt the same as before, controlled, neutral, unchanged. Logan walked through it without stopping. He did not return to his office. There was nothing there he needed. By late afternoon, he was back at the apartment. The same space, the same silence, but no longer neutral. He moved through the room slowly, not searching, not avoiding, just present. On the table, the divorce folder remained, unmoved since the night before. He picked it up, opened it, read the first page again. The language was clear, structured, controlled, just as he had intended. He closed it, placed it back on the table. The control he had believed in, the structure he had constructed, had not failed. It had simply existed within something larger, something he had not seen. Across the city, Chelsea stood near the window of her apartment. The light had begun to shift. Late afternoon settling into evening. Her phone vibrated once. A message from Evelyn. Final determination expected tomorrow. Chelsea read it, then set the phone down. There was no anticipation, no reflection, no need to revisit what had already been completed. She moved through the apartment, adjusting nothing. Because nothing required adjustment. The process was no longer hers to manage. It had been transferred. To structure, to system, to time. And time once aligned does not hesitate. It proceeds. The final determination arrived without announcement. At 9:02 a.m., the email appeared in Logan Hayes' inbox with the same neutral formatting as every message that had come before it. No urgency, no emphasis. Just a subject line that did not attempt to soften or dramatize what it contained. Final determination, internal review outcome. He opened it immediately. The language was precise, measured, irreversible. Following comprehensive review of submitted materials and internal records, it has been determined that certain financial activities were conducted outside of authorized procedures and do not align with company policy standards. He read the next line more slowly. Effective immediately, your employment with Hayes and Rowe Holdings is terminated. No additional commentary, no explanation beyond what had already been documented. No reference to intention, only record. Logan did not respond. There was no reply option that would alter the outcome. He closed the email, then opened it again, not to reread, to confirm that it existed exactly as he had seen it. A second message followed. Human resources, details regarding final compensation, remaining obligations, return of company-issued materials, language structured to complete a process not extended. He leaned back in his chair. The office around him remained unchanged. Same desk, same chair, same view through the glass. But the context had been removed. And without context, position becomes memory. Nothing more. He stood. Not abruptly, not slowly. Just enough to transition from one state to another. He gathered what remained his. Minimal, a notebook. Personal items that had never carried weight within the structure he had believed defined him. He did not look around the office again. There was nothing there that required acknowledgement. As he stepped into the hallway, no one stopped him. No one spoke. There was no audience for departure, only continuation. In the elevator, his reflection returned. Unchanged in appearance, altered in meaning. He watched it without interpretation. Then the doors opened. Across the city, Chelsea Simmons received a message at 9:05 a.m. Final determination complete. No elaboration, no summary. She did not open any attachments. She did not need to. Everything had already been understood. She set the phone down and continued what she'd been doing. A simple task, routine, uninterrupted. Later that morning, she entered the building at Hayes and Rowe Holdings again. Not for announcement, not for presence, for continuity. Inside, the environment had settled. The shift that had once felt unfamiliar now existed as structure. Processes aligned, reporting lines adjusted. No visible disruption, only progression. Chelsea moved through the space without drawing attention, as she always had. In a conference room on the upper floor, Evelyn Carter reviewed final documents. "Termination executed," she said as Chelsea entered. Chelsea nodded. "Any outstanding issues?" she asked. Evelyn shook her head. "None that require escalation." Chelsea took a seat. "Then proceed with standard transition." Evelyn closed the file. "It's already in motion." There was no discussion of Logan, no reflection on outcome, no acknowledgement beyond what had been required to complete the process. Later that afternoon, Chelsea returned to her apartment. The space remained unchanged, quiet, ordered, complete. She moved through it with the same measured rhythm, placed her bag on the table, set her phone beside it, paused briefly near the window. The city moved below, unaware, unchanged. On the table, the divorce folder was not there. She had not brought it home. It remained where it belonged, within process, within structure. Her phone vibrated once more. A message from Evelyn. "Divorce filings updated based on current position. Awaiting your review." Chelsea read it, then replied, "Proceed." There was no need to adjust tone, no need to revisit terms emotionally. The structure had already aligned. She sat down, opened a blank page in her notebook, not the one she had used before, a new one. For a moment she did not write, not because there was nothing to record, because there was nothing left that required it. She closed the notebook, left the page empty. Across the city, Logan stood outside the building he had left behind. Not waiting, not returning, just standing. His phone remained in his pocket. Unread messages, unanswered calls, questions that no longer carried urgency. The structure he had believed defined his future had moved forward without him. Not violently, not abruptly, precisely. He turned and walked, not toward a destination, just away. Inside her apartment, Chelsea remained seated. The quiet around her was not absence. It was completion. She had not raised her voice. She had not argued. She had not corrected him when he misunderstood her. She had observed, recorded, aligned. And when the moment arrived, she had not taken anything from him. She had simply allowed the structure to reveal what already existed. Outside, the light shifted again. Late afternoon, moving toward evening. Chelsea stood, moved toward the door, paused only long enough to take her coat. There was no final glance back, no need for it. She stepped outside, closed the door behind her, and walked forward. Not with urgency, not with hesitation, with the same quiet precision she had always carried. Because nothing about her had changed. Only everything around her had. And that difference, quiet, unspoken, complete, was enough. The story does not end with what was taken or what was lost. It settles somewhere quieter than that. Chelsea Simmons was never underestimated because she lacked something. She was underestimated because she chose not to display what others relied on to define strength. She did not interrupt. She did not defend herself in moments designed to provoke reaction. She allowed people to speak, to act, to reveal themselves fully. Because truth, when given time, does not require force to emerge. Logan believed control came from being seen, from shaping perception in real time, from speaking first and louder. But control that depends on performance rarely survives structure. When records replace assumptions, when systems replace narratives, what remains is not what someone intended, but what they did. There was no victory in what happened. No celebration. No moment where one stood above the other and claimed anything. There was only alignment. Actions meeting consequence. Silence meeting clarity. And perhaps that is the part that lingers. Not the fall, but the stillness that came before it. If you've stayed with this story until the end, take a moment to reflect on where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Stories like this travel quietly across places and lives, connecting people who understand what it means to be overlooked and what it takes to remain steady anyway. If this kind of story speaks to you, stories about quiet strength, about truth revealed through time, then staying connected here might matter more than it seems.